This conference will now be recorded.
1 second, please.
This conference will now be recorded.
Right, let's continue. Yeah, so before I start the functions concept, one of you sent me a mail saying that can we loop the internal table in the procedures? Okay, yes, we can very much loop the internal table. So let me show you one syntax for that, how to process the internal table in which we retrieve the data. Okay, so before I start procedures, I'll take one more example on procedures. Okay, so for that, I'll quickly create one table which I'll be using in functions also. So I'll open the SQL console. Yeah, right. So let me set the schema for this. Right, schema is set. Now I'll quickly create one table which I'll be using in coming sessions also related to functions. Okay, so let me create the table. So create column table. I'll give the table name E underscore department. Let me provide some column names. EMPID integer primary key. Okay, fine. Yeah, integer primary key. Then employee name. Let me give it as something varchar of 20. I'll create another column, a department number integer. Then I'll take some salary kind of thing. I'll give the data type as decimal 12 comma 2, and then I'll take another column like commission. I'll take this as something a decimal of 6 comma 2. So this is a table I'm creating which contains some 5 columns: employee ID, employee name, department number, salary, and what commission. Okay, done. Let me execute this. Yeah, the table got created. Right. So in this table, I'll maintain some data. Okay, I'll maintain some data. I'll maintain the data only for 4 columns. That is employee ID, employee name, department number, and salary. So I'll insert some data, insert into E underscore department. Okay, since I don't want to maintain data for all the columns, for whichever columns you want to maintain the data, as usual, in the parentheses, you have to provide the column names, and that column names you have to enclose it in what double quotes, or even if you don't give double quotes, also no problem. So employee ID, employee name, department number, and salary. Then here I'll say values. I'll provide some data here. Yeah, this is the data. I'll insert some records. Right, let me insert some 8 records. Right, so this is the data. I'll give the department numbers 30. I'll change the salaries also. Right. So these are the 8 records I want to insert. Perfect. So all the 8 records are inserted. So if I refresh our table section, right. So what is the table we have created? E underscore department. So this is the table. This is the definition of the table, which contains some 5 columns. And let me query for the data. Yeah, the other records available. Since I have not maintained any data for commission, commission is what? Null here, blank. Okay. So what is my requirement is I want to create a procedure. Okay. So inside that procedure, I have to retrieve the data from this particular table and store that data into the some internal table. And once the data is stored in the internal table, I need to process that internal table. I mean to say, I need to loop that internal table. So when I'm looping that internal table, what I have to do is I have to what set the data for the commission in the table. Means if the department number is 10, I want to set the commission as a 10% of salary. If the department number is 20, 20% of salary. If it is other than 10 and 20, I have to set some 30% of the salary. So earlier we have seen similar example, but there I believe I used cursors. Okay, I declare the cursor, I open the cursor, then we are reading the cursor by using what? Loop and loop. Inside that loop and loop, I think we have used what? Fetch statement, and at the last, we have closed the cursor. So here what I want is, I don't want to use any cursor concept, just like in a normal ABAP. If you take our traditional ABAP, what you will do, we will fetch the data from the database table by using select query. The data will come and sit in the internal table. Once the data is there in the internal table, we will loop the internal table. So here also I want to write the same kind of logic, but as you know, the procedure will be executed in the HANA database, not in the application server. So agenda is uh, when I when I process an internal table, I should able to update the commission column in the database table. So what is the formula? Based on the department number, I have to update the commission. If the department number is 10, I need to set some 10% of salary. 20 means 20% of salary. If it is other than 10 and 20, I need to set some 30% of the salary. So let me create the procedure. Okay, so I'll create the procedure in the SQL console only. Create procedure. I'll give some meaningful name. I'll give the procedure name as something update commission. Done. Then as begin. Yeah. What I'll do is I'll declare some local variables. Already we know how to declare the variables inside the procedure. We use what some declare keyword. Okay. I'll give the variable name as something lv underscore count. Lv underscore count. Let me give it as integer. Okay. I'll give some default value. Let me give something 0. I'll declare another variable lv underscore something loop count. Let me declare it as integer. I'll initialize to 0. Done. So now, yeah. So we have overall 5 columns in the table. Out of 5 columns, let me declare some 4 variables. lv underscore emp id. I'll declare it as integer. Then declare lv underscore department number. So what is the agenda at the end is I need to update my commission. Okay, so when I'm updating my commission in my table, okay, I need to what update it based on the employee ID. Employee ID is a primary key here, so it will not accept what duplicate value. It's a primary key, so based on the employee ID only I need to update. So when I use the update statement, I need to use a where class comparing with employee ID, so that we can guarantee that the specific record is updated. Okay, so keeping this requirement in mind, I declared a variable employee ID of type what integer. Then my calculation is based on department number. That's the reason I declared another variable LV underscore department number. Let me declare it as integer. Done. Then I'll declare another field. Then I want the commission based on the salary. So I'll declare another variable something LV underscore salary. Decimal of in the table the salary column is what 12 comma 2, and commission is what 6 comma 2. So here also I'll give the same properties 12 comma 2. Then declare LV underscore commission. Okay, I'll declare it as something decimal of 6 comma 2. So I declared what some variables here. Okay, so I declare variables. So what is the agenda now? Whatever the data is there in the table, I need to fetch this complete data. Okay, I need to fetch this complete data. Okay, so after fetching this data based on the department number, I need to do the calculation. So I'll declare one variable itab equal to, I'll write the select query. I may not be interested in employee name. If I'm interested in employee name also, I would have said select star. Okay, but I don't want all the 5 columns. I want only 4 columns. So that's the reason select EMP ID. What is the other column I want? Department number. Then I'll say something salary. Then I'll fetch another column commission from what is the table name E underscore department. So the database table name is E underscore department. So I got the data into what my internal table. So this internal table gets created what dynamically. So what is the advantage here? I not declare this internal table. Depending on the select query, depending on the select query means depending on the number of fields, depending upon the sequence of the fields we retrieve, automatically this internal table gets what created. So in the runtime, what happens during the execution of the program, this internal table gets created with how many columns? 4 columns. Okay, employee ID, department number, salary, and what commission. So now what I'll do is, yeah, now so I need to check whether my internal table is having any data or not. So I'll write some select query here. I'll say select. Uh, we are having one aggregate function, what count function. So select count of star. Select count of star into. I'll transfer that count value in my local variable what lv underscore count from lv underscore count from what itab. So here you have to say what column, because it is not a database table, it is an internal table. We are using the select query based on what internal table. That's why I need to prefix it what this column from column itab. So depending on the number of records in the internal table, that count value will be retrieved, and that value is stored in my local variable what lv underscore count. Done. Now here I'll say if lv underscore count is not equal to 0. Okay, if lv underscore count is not equal to 0, then okay, then end for if is what, as usual I'll use what end if. So if lv underscore count is not equal to 0, then I need to loop the internal table. So if you take a traditional ABAP in the application server, what we will do, we'll say loop at itab into work area so and so. Okay, but here we don't have that syntax because the procedure gets executed where in HANA database level. So I'll use the loop statement. Okay, loop statement. End for loop is what? As usual, end loop. Okay, loop and end loop. Done. So inside this loop and loop, okay. So I should write one termination condition. If you take a traditional ABAP, again you'll say loop at I tab into some work area kind of thing. So what happens? The loop statement will start the iteration from first record and continue till what? The last record, and continue till last record. Here also, we don't know how many records are there in the internal table. Okay, when all the records are completed, I should exit from the loop. So I believe in the last sessions we discussed a statement called as break statement. Break statement is used for what? Exiting from the current loop. So here also I want to exit. So I'll say if lv underscore count, if lv underscore count is less than or equal to lv underscore, I declare another variable lv underscore loop count. If it is less than equal to lv underscore loop count, then I'll say break. Break you can visualize similar to what exit statement in our ABAP. Okay, so break will come out of the current loop. What is the current loop here? Loop and end loop. Right. So I'm writing some exit condition here. Whenever the count value is less than or equal to loop count, then I'm saying break. Done. So what I need to do now, the entire data is stored in what? Internal table. So I need to read one record from the internal table. Okay, so already in the last week, I think we have seen cursors. Okay, what you are doing inside the loop and loop, we are using what? Fetch statement. Fetch statement. We are reading the cursor data using what? Fetch statement. So I told that this fetch statement is similar to what? A read statement. In our ABAP, we have read statement which reads what? One record at a time. Here also we have fetch statement, but here we are not using any cursor statement. But somehow I need to process, I need to iterate one record at a time. So see what I'll do. Hmm. So inside the loop and loop, I'll say select. In the internal table, each record contains how many fields? Four fields now. What are the four fields? Employee ID, department number, salary, and what? Commission. So I'll say select. What is that? EMP ID, department number, what? Salary, commission. Okay, select so and so fields into my local variables. I declared some four local variables now, so I'll say into lv underscore emp id comma lv underscore what? Emp id. Done. Lv underscore department number, then I'll say lv underscore salary, then I'll say lv underscore what? Commission. Okay, so just to increase the readability, I'll give spaces, not required, but just to increase the readability, I'm giving the spaces here into LV underscore commission from where? From the internal table, sorry, from column I tab. Then it has to fetch only one record at a time, one record at a time. So I'll say we have a syntax limit one offset. I declared one variable lv underscore loop count, so offset lv underscore loop count. So you can visualize this similar to what? Select single. In our normal ABAP, we have an open SQL statement, select single, which is used for what? Retrieving single record from the database table. Here also, we want to read only one record at a time from the internal table. So remember, I am using the select statement based on what? Internal table. So limit one means get fetch only one record. Offset means which position. Okay. So initially, the moment you enter the loop, what is the value of loop count? Initially, I gave 0. So I'm assuming that the index of the internal table starts from what? 0. The initial value of loop count is what? 0. So offset 0 means the index position. In our ABAP, normal ABAP, if you take, the index of the internal table starts from 1. Here, I'm trying to give it as 0. So let's see whether it will fetch the data or not. Done. So I would get the data into my local variables. So before I continue, any questions so far? Anyone? No questions? So what you are doing is, initially we are fetching the complete data into my local internal table. Then what I am doing, inside the loop and loop, I need to read one record at a time from the internal table. So I'm using the select query based on internal table, and we are ensuring that each time we have to fetch only one record. How do you fetch? By using this syntax, limit one, offset so and so, the value of this loop count. Initially the loop count value is what? 0. Done. So I would get the data into my local variables. Now I'll say if, here I'll say if what? LV underscore department number. If LV underscore department number equal to 10, then if LV underscore department number equal to 10, then what is the formula? If the department number is 10, means commission should be 10% of our salary. So I'll say LV underscore commission is equal to what? LV underscore salary into what? 10 by 100. Done. Else if LV underscore department number is equal to 20, then I'll say LV underscore commission is equal to what? LV underscore salary into 20%. Else means if it is other than 10 and 20, it can be anything. So I'll say LV underscore commission is equal to what? LV underscore salary into what? 30 by 100 into 30 by 100. Done. And end for if is what? End if. That's all. So based on the department number, I'm constructing, calculating some value for what? Commission based on what? Salary. Okay, done. So I would get the commission value inside this particular variable. But what is our agenda at the end? At the end, I need to update my internal table. Sorry, I need to update my database table, right? So what I'll do is inside the loop and loop only, inside the loop and loop, I will use update statement. Acha, remember, uh, here we are using the loop and loop inside the update. So there is no performance decrease. Simple agenda is where the procedure gets executed in the database, in the HANA database directly. So you need not worry about that. If you take a traditional ABAP, if you write this kind of logic inside our ABAP program, it decreases the performance because loop and loop gets executed where in the application server. Okay, in our traditional ABAP, the loop and loop statement gets executed in the application server. So for every record of that loop, this update statement gets executed. So this update statement should travel from application server to database server. So it's a performance issue over there. But whereas here, this procedure gets executed directly in the HANA database. Means all the statements inside the procedure gets executed at the HANA database level itself. So you need not worry even if you are using update statement inside what? Loop and end loop. So update, what is the database table? E underscore department set what? Commission is equal to what? LV underscore commission. So if I leave it like this, what happens? It would update all the records of the database table, but I need to update what? Specific record. So that's why you can see here when you're fetching the data, where is that? When we're fetching the data, we are also fetching the employee ID, na, which is the primary key. So I'll say where EMP ID equal to what is that? LV underscore EMP ID. That's all. So I'm using the update statement to update my database table, and we are in the loop only. So each time, let me increment that loop count variable value. LV underscore loop count equal to LV underscore loop count plus 1. That's all. End loop, end if, and end for procedure is what? End. Yeah, that's all. Let me cross check the code once. Yeah, this is a procedure without any parameters. So already we know we can create the procedures either with parameter or what? Without parameters. So I'm creating it without parameters. Then I declared some local variables. Initially, we are fetching the complete table data into my internal table, which gets created during the execution. And I'm counting the number of records. If the count value is not equal to 0, then I'm entering the loop, and each time I need to process one record. So for that, what you have to do, I have to use select statement in the internal table. And how do you ensure that we read only one record at a time? Means by using this syntax. Limit one means it has to select only one record, and which record it has to select based on the offset position. This is controlled by a variable loop count. So initially loop count is what? 0. So let's see whether it works or not. And once we get the data into my individual variables, I'm checking deploy number equal to 10, salary is so, commission is so and so, 20 means commission is so and so, else commission is so and so. So once we calculate the commission value, we need to update that in the inter database table. So I'm using the update statement. When I'm using the update statement, I'm comparing with the employee ID, so that appropriate record will be updated, and every time I'm incrementing the loop count value with what? 1. So in my table we are having what? 8 records. So at certain stage loop count value becomes what? 8. Any other count value also will be what? 8 only na? So when 8 is equal to 8, I am saying what? Break, which will come out of the current loop statement. So let me try to execute. Let us check whether we have any syntax error. Okay, select the block. I'll say F8 for execution. Okay, I got an error. Where is error I got? Incorrect syntax. What is that? SQL syntax. Incorrect syntax near what? LV underscore loop count line 22. Line 22. Might be this only. This statement. Line 22 it seems. How do you count this? From here only, na? Starting from 21. Line 22 it seems. This one. This is error. Might be, should I use any colon here? Let me check. I'm using colon because I'm in the select statement. Okay, so here I used what? Colon here, because we are referring that in the select statement. Let me check. Again, select the block, say F8. Good. The problem is here only. What is the problem earlier? It is saying that problem is there in what? Line 22. Somewhere here. Incorrect syntax near LV underscore loop count. So I started my procedure from which line? Somewhere from 21st line. We are having the error in what? 22nd line means somewhere in this 42nd here only. Na? So why it is giving the error is we are referring to this variable. We are referring to this variable as part of select statement. So I need to refer it as a bind variable. So we have to use what? Colon. So at last the procedure got what? Created. Okay, the procedure is successfully created. So where I can check that procedure? In my schema, under procedures tab, procedures node, somewhere your procedure will be there. What is the procedure name? Update commission. Yeah, you can see at the bottom, this is the procedure, update commission, which got created. Okay, so let me try to call the procedure. So if you see the table, if I refresh F5, so I don't have any data forward commission because we have simply created the procedure. We have not invoked the procedure. We have not called the procedure. So let me call the procedure. How do you call? Already we know. Call. Call. What is the procedure name? Update commission. It doesn't have any parameters. I'll pass the empty parenthesis. When I execute, when I say F8, yeah, it might be updated. It might be updated. So if I refresh, okay, I got the values for what? Commission 100 to 200, 900, 400, so on. So working fine. So here the main thing we need to understand from this is, can we process the internal table inside the what procedures? Yes. So we have seen two ways. One is without taking the internal, we went for cursors. In the earlier last week, we have used cursors inside the procedures. Okay, here we took what? Temporary internal table. We are able to iterate that internal table and do the required updation. Any questions, please ask me. Clear?
Uh,
Yeah, Kishore, tell me.
in case we maintain the percentage maintenance, I think.
Kishore, can you be louder, please?
Hello.
Yeah, Kishore, tell me.
In case we maintain a department number and the percentage in some other table, so we need to get the data into some other variable and then do the calculation.
Correct. Yes, I need to take another internal table. I tab one. You fetch the data from that, and based on that, you do the process. Process would be same, but one more select statement I have to write.
There
This is
won't
no
be any
issue.
issue with the limit one or something like that, right?
Nothing, no limit, nothing, no issues. Others, any questions? Jagat, Lalit. That's what the exercise I gave Sri Lakshmi, na?
No, sir,
That's
I'm
what.
fine.
Yeah. Sri Lakshmi, that's what the exercise I gave. What is the exercise I gave is here. I'm fetching how many records here? Where? Yeah, here we are fetching four records. So in this case, the internal gets what declare automatically. Here you are saying, na? Yeah, when you are selecting here, I'm transferring into what? Four different variables. I'm transferring into four different variables. So here, instead of doing that, I told that in other databases, we have a concept called as row type declaration, which is similar to work area. Okay, it is very much supported in Oracle and SQL Server, but in HANA, I tried in many ways. Still, I'm not getting the answer for that. Let me try some more time. Then, if I get the answer, definitely let you know. That's what the exercise I gave for all of you also. I told that check whether HANA database supports row type declaration. So when I go for row type declaration, instead of declaring these four variables, I can refer it as only what? One work area. Only one work area. So we need to check that syntax selection. I tried in many ways, but nowhere we didn't got the solution. But you also please try from your end. I gave two exercises. One is row type declaration, another is percentage type declaration. Percentage type declaration means here I declared this variable, I declared as integer. Why I declared this as integer? Because in my table also this employee ID is what? Integer. The problem with this approach is what? Sorry, what is the problem with this approach? As of now, it is working, but in future, if the table field data type is modified, if this is modified, again I have to do the corresponding changes in my procedure also now. So instead of hard coding the data type, if you take a traditional ABAP, I can refer to a data element. I can refer to data element, or I can say table name hyphen field name. But in other databases like Oracle and SQL Server, we have a concept called as percentage type declaration. where I can dynamically refer to that particular table field itself, but we are not getting the appropriate syntax in HANA. I'm trying in many documentation, but nowhere they're talking about that. But definitely there should be some solution. Okay, I'll check. I'll check once again and let you know if any solution is there. Two things: percentage declaration and what row type declaration. Done. Any other questions, others? Yeah, so far we have seen what procedures. We have seen how to create the procedures and how to call the procedures. So here we have a concept called as functions also. Functions. Okay. So what is a function means already somewhere, I believe in the last week I used somewhere what two underscore date. It is also what a standard function which is available in the HANA database, which will convert the given string value stored in date format to what date data type. It will convert the string data type to what date data type. This is a standard function which is available in HANA database. Similarly, we can create what user defined functions, UDF. We call it as what UDF, user defined function. So I can say this functions is similar to procedures, but there are some slight differences. What are the differences is, so far if you see our procedures, we can use a procedures both for what read and what write operations. Read and what write operations. I can use a procedures both for read and write operations. Okay, but whereas if you take functions, functions can be used only for what read operations. So last class, I think in the last class only, I discussed how to create read-only procedure. Okay, how to create the read-only procedure? Anyone? Last class we discussed how to create read-only procedure. Anyone? Yes, anyone? How to create read-only procedure? Last class we discussed. I mean, this on Friday's class, I think. Yeah, Kishore? Anyone? Just we have to use the addition here while creating the procedure. We have to use the addition called as what reads SQL data. So when you say reads SQL data, I've shown you the syntax in the last class. If you use the addition reads SQL data, means inside the procedure, I can use only select query. I cannot use the other DML statements like insert, update, or delete. So this is the way to create what read-only procedure. But if you take functions, functions can be used only for what? Read operations. Only select queries are allowed. We cannot use other statements. And another point is if you take procedures, procedures may or may not return a value. Procedures may or may not return a value. But whereas functions must return a value. Okay, must return a value. So far we have seen I can create the procedure without parameters. I can create the procedure only with input parameters. I can create the procedures both with the input parameter as well as the output parameter, or I can create the procedure only with what output parameters, that is return parameters. But if you take functions, functions must return a value. And another point is, in case of procedure, another difference in case of procedures, we need to specify which is input parameter and which is output parameter. Okay, so if you want to declare it as input parameter, we use the keyword in. If you don't use the keyword, it is if you want to return it, we have to declare it as what out. But if you take functions, what are the parameters we pass for a function? By default all are what input parameters. Okay, I'll quickly summarize. Function is also similar to what procedure means. Function is also a function also should be created only once and can be called any number of what times. The major difference between the stored procedures and the functions is Stored procedures can be used for both read or write operations, whereas functions can be used only for what? Read operations. That is, only select queries are allowed. In case of stored procedures, it may or may not return a value, whereas functions must return a value. And stored procedures can contain both input parameter and what? Output parameter. Whereas if you take functions, by default, what are the parameters we specify in the parentheses? They are considered what? Input parameters. Okay. So already we have seen one standard function given by what? HANA database. What is that? To underscore date. Like that, going forward, we'll come across many standard function. Now we are focusing on what? UDF, that is user defined functions. This UDF, user defined functions, I can classify further into two types. One is scalar UDF functions, another is table UDF functions. Okay, these user defined functions we can further classify into two types. One is scalar, another is what table. Okay, so what is the difference between the scalar and table is, if you take scalar user defined functions, this can contain only primitive data types as what? Input parameters. So when I say primitive data types, integer, varchar, date, all those things comes under what? The standard data types, primitive data types. Okay, so in case of scalar user defined functions, it can contain only primitive data types as input parameters and return values. Whereas if you take table UDF, that is table user defined functions, it can contain primitive data types or table types as input parameters and only table types as what? Return values. So what I can say is, the functions which returns the table types, the functions which returns the table types, those functions we call it as what? Table UDF. The functions which returns the normal primitive data types like integer, varchar, date, okay, all those things are called as what? Scalar UDF. Okay, scalar UDF. Okay, so let me quickly show you one simple function, very simple function, just to understand the syntax. One second. Yeah, so my requirement is what? Acha, again, if you, before doing this, if you take our other languages, like what, if you take C language or C++, okay, in case of C language or C++, a function can return only one value. How to return a value there? We have to use a keyword called as return keyword. In case of C, C++, a function can return only one value, but whereas in this HANA database, a function can return any number of values, any number of values. So let me show you a very simple example just to understand the syntax. So my requirement is, I want to create a function which will take some two integers as input and return me the what? Sum of those two numbers as well as the difference of those two numbers. So what you do? Create. In case of procedure, we are using the keyword what? Create procedure. So here I'll say create function, create function. I'll give the function name as something option, some name, okay, options. I'll take some two parameters, x as what? Integer, and y as what? Integer. So what is the understanding here? What are the parameters you specify in the function parenthesis there? They are considered what? Input parameter. In case of procedures, we have to use what? In keyword. You have to use a keyword in keyword. But whereas here, these parameters by default are what? Input parameters. Done. So create function so and so. What is my agenda here? I need to return two values. One is sum of those two numbers as well as what? Difference of those two numbers. So I'll say returns. Returns. See the keyword returns. What I'll say, k1 integer comma k2 integer, means you have to specify what kind of data type we have to return. So I'm declaring two, I'm returning two values, k1 as integer and k2 also as integer. Then as usual, I have to say as begin. I'll say something, k1 is equal to what? X plus y, Okay, K2 is equal to what? X minus Y. End for this is N. That's all. Okay, so I am trying to create a function which contains two parameters, two input parameters, and which returns two values. I'll do one thing. Let me try this. I'm commenting this in the sense I'm not using the return keyword. So let me cross check whether I can create the function or not. But technically, if you take a C++, a function has to return a value. So here also, my understanding is it must return a value, but I'm commenting it wantedly. Let me cross check whether it supports or not. Let me execute. I'll say fit. I got an error here. I got an error. Incorrect syntax near as. Yeah, it is giving an error here only. So what is the meaning? Compulsorily, I need to return the what values from the function. So I'll just let me try to uncomment. How to comment? Hyphen so that the entire line will be commented. So I'm removing that. Let me re-execute F8. Yeah, the function got created. So when I comment that return keyword, I am getting an error. Done. Okay, so we have created the functions. We have created the function. So if you observe here in this schema, we have what? Functions. Let me expand this. Yeah, you can see the functions got created. What is that function? Option. Let me call the function. How do you call a procedure? We have to use a keyword called as call. Here also, let me try to use call and check whether it works or not. Call. What is that function name? Options. Huh? So call for options. Okay, I'll pass two values 10, comma 20. How do we receive? How do we receive the return values on the procedure? We use this placeholders now. So if you're having two return values, we would give what? Two question marks, something like this. Okay, this is the way you do it. Okay, here also I'll try to do the same thing. Let me check whether I'll get any errors. When I say F8, good. I'm getting an error. Good, good, good. What is the error I got? Invalid name of function or what? Procedure. So it is giving an error. Invalid name of function or procedure. So it is giving an error. So how do you call this means? You'll say select. Try to understand. Select. What is the function name? Options. Huh? Select options. I'll say something 15 comma 8 from dummy so let's see whether it will get an error or not. Already we know about dummy. Okay, it is a temporary table which gets created during the execution of what select statement, and this table can be used for holding the values temporarily, but I believe this will give me an error. Let me check. When I say F8, yeah, I got an error. See the error message here. Wrong number of arguments. This user defined function has multiple outputs means multiple return value, but this usage requires a single output. So it is saying that this I can use only if your function is returning me only what? One value. Okay, but here my function is returning what? Multiple values. So what is the adjustment I need to do? Select. What is that? Options. Select options. I'll say something 15 comma 8. 15 comma 8 dot k1 as some alias I'll give, some column heading I'll give as addition, comma. Once again, I have to say options. I'll give the same values 15 comma 8 dot k2. I'll do one thing. I'll do one thing. I'll give this as addition from what? Dummy. Okay, let me check whether this is valid or not. So what I'm trying to do here, my function is returning what? Two values, but I'm trying to receive only what? One value. Let me check whether it's valid or not. When I say F8, good, very much valid. So what I got, output I got is 23. So what is the understanding? My function is returning multiple values, but depending on our requirement, we can receive appropriate parameters. So just like if you take our ABAP function models, we may have multiple export parameters inside a function model. And we know that export parameters are always optional. Export parameters are always optional. So in some places, I may receive some parameters. In some other places, I may receive what some other parameters. Okay, so here also, I am receiving only one parameter. Let me try to receive multiple parameters as addition. Then here I'll say comma options. What is that? I'll say something 15 comma 8 as some alias name column heading I'll give as difference from what? Dummy. That's all. Let me check. When I say F8, oh, I'm getting an error. Sorry, my syntax is wrong. Na? What is that? Specify a single output. I have not given any this thing here. Dot where to receive it as K2. Dot K2 as difference from dummy. So when I say F8, I got the result 23 and what 7. So this is a way to create the function and to call the function. So what we understood is a function must return a value. A function must return at least one value. And what are the parameters we specify in this parenthesis? They are considered what input parameters. And how do you call the function from the SQL console? By using this particular select statement, something like this. If you have multiple parameters, you have to specify which parameter you are interested to receive it. I may receive only few parameters or I may receive multiple return values. So as of now, I'm calling this function from a SQL console, but generally we can call a function from another function or we can call a function from another procedure. So going forward, we'll see that scenarios also. But any questions in this part, please ask me. So this we call it as scalar user defined function. Why we are calling it as scalar user defined function? Because we are passing primitive data types. I mean to say standard data types as parameter and we are returning what? The primitive data type. That is standard data types as return values. So tomorrow what we will do is we will see how to return tables from what functions, how to return tables from the function, and we have not yet seen how to call the procedures from the ABAP programs. So there is a standard mechanism for creating the procedure that probably we may discuss tomorrow. But before that, we should discuss some more examples on these functions. Examples for what? User-defined table functions. So that we'll discuss tomorrow. Any questions for today? Please ask me. No questions? Chalo then. So I'll wind off. So I'll share this recording in the material. Practices. Tomorrow we'll see table user defined function, and if time permits, we will see how to call the procedures from what ABAP layer. Done. Yeah, Nagaraj, if you have any doubts, you can call me after the session. You have my number, na? You can call me after that. I'll speak to you. Okay. Chalo then. So I'm winding off. We'll continue tomorrow. Okay.